What up? Welcome to the show. Okay. We are here today to talk to you about the movie Ink. Ink. So, anybody like to start us off with our conversation today?
I have to make connections with phenomenology, or
Phenomenology?
Yeah, that one.
Corey?
That, what?
Would you like to start us off with that then?
No.
Okay, I can start us off.
Choice making.
Choice making. A lot of the phenomenology within the movie, the making all the choices. I believe the Pathfinder kind of laid out the whole, the entire idea of the movie, this whole phenomenology idea. He talked about all of these choices you make throughout your life are all connected, and they ultimately come. And each choice you're making is building up to the point you were at that exact moment. The whole idea, he kept counting to 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. He's making exact steps, because if you make a different choice, it's one way or the other, you might change something. And that's a kind of the whole concept of the entire movie, is that the father, what's his name again? John, if he makes one choice differently, if he chose instead to go to the daughter, see the daughter when she first got in the accident, if he chose to do things differently, it would ultimately change the direction he was going. And the whole direction, and I think we can kind of all agree on, is suicide. So,
I remember one thing, like, he was talking about time, and that's like, they'd be walking across the street, and like the car would pass like right after they walked by. Like, as far as timing and everything.
No, right. Timing comes down to everything. Because, like, if you think about it, if that person in the car had decided instead to sleep in an extra minute, that choice has now changed everything. It's not, that car is not going to come by at the exact same time. It's going to come by at a different time. So all these choices are pretty much connecting to themselves. Now, he makes choices throughout the movie that very definitely change the way the movie ends up. Can you spot out any of those changes?
One of them was like when he, like towards the beginning, when he was out playing with his daughter, and like the daughter wanted him to go over there, and like he just said he couldn't deal with that right now because he had to work.
Yeah,
and then later on,
he was choosing to stay away from that. Like, that's another whole part of the whole idea that he wasn't there. Yeah.
And then
totally
like
agreed.
Later on, that's when he realized, like, he actually took the initiative and like spent time with her and went along with what she wanted, and he wasn't necessarily just deciding that he had to go do work.
And that also shows, like, in that moment when he's playing with his daughter, that he's happy with her too, like, because you see all these like suicidal thoughts that he has, or like the depression that he feels when he's Ink, and then when he's at her hospital bed, one of the things that makes him realize that his life is so good is because of his daughter. When he played with her that one time.
Yeah, that was a very interesting thing. The connection they made at the end was while he was thinking about all those things and the death and suicide and everything, one of the most important thoughts he had was, well, the baby, holding the baby, but that moment when he was playing with her. So if he had made a choice different there, do you think he would probably maybe could have committed suicide? Because I think that was a pretty strong point in making him not. He realized that made me happy, seeing my daughter playing with her in that moment.
And it also, like, it looked like it relieved a lot of stress for him too, because at work he was always so stressed, and he didn't want to do this and he didn't want to do that. And then when he finally like gave in and he was playing with her, like, he was happy and he was laughing with her, and
he was in that moment. And up till that point, he wasn't in that moment.
And showing how he actually like enjoyed life then compared to work.
And then later on, he made a decision that kind of turned him a little bit to the other direction. Is when she ended up unconscious too. That's the one I noticed, is when he decides, when the grandpa comes and kind of pleads for him to go there, he decides not to go, because he'd gotten so engrossed in his work that the choice he's making wasn't even really moral anymore. It was just, I'm doing this. This is what I'm doing. He's not even in the moment thinking about his daughter, thinking about that time he had with her. He's not thinking about that anymore, because he's making, up till that point, he made other choices that kind of led him to make that decision not to see her.
Like when he was like climbing the chain in his company, like he'd go out and party.
Yeah.
Instead of going home to his wife and kid, and that ultimately just backfired on him.
No, yeah, definitely. And that was like a fight scene, like or like argument fights, but him and his wife arguing about how he kept going out and partying.
Mm-hmm.
And the choices that he were making, I guess we might kind of make a link it to something that we'll probably talk about a little bit. Because I guess another choice he made was to ignore the call from work that time and go see his daughter. That ultimately probably saved him.
When he was in the hospital, yeah.
Yeah, that probably saved him from just everything that would have happened. So.
And like it even showed how much he wanted to go see her then, but it was like fighting against him because that's when like the good and the bad were fighting.
Yep. Yeah. So like that whole good and the bad in the mind, and this will kind of be the. First we'll link instead before we get into that conversation is the question, and we'll talk about a little bit of that good and the bad moral agents of how did he not become himself anymore? How did he change so much that he wasn't even himself? And I think a lot of the choices kind of lead up to that point. So one of the biggest things I noticed is that there was a scene where like his wife is seeing him and she's like, "Who are you?" And this wasn't when he was ink. This was like he was like dreaming and he saw his wife, and "This isn't who you are anymore." I believe that was one of the lines, or no, one of the lines is, "This is who you used to be," and that's a very interesting thought I think to kind of build off of in the movie is the whole idea of you ever looked back on yourself and said, "This is what I used to be." It's a very interesting thought. Is like you're not yourself anymore. That wasn't yourself, and maybe you finally in college become yourself now. And I think a lot of what the dad did was he was no longer himself anymore. He wasn't a father.
And another thing is like he would always fight for his daughter. Like when he was ink, even when he first met Storyteller and how she's just like, take me and not her.
Mm-hmm.
But he would never give her up. Like he always wanted her with him.
Mm-hmm.
Like it shows like how he wanted his daughter in his life, but he never actually like made the time.
Yeah, there was like this conscious thing of like I don't know why I want her, but I know that I do. Like I'm confused. There's definitely confusion there, but I think big part of when they kind of mirror the ink is like kind of the image of himself. If he had chosen not to, if he had fallen into the incubus and let that happen, if he had made all these bad choices, he'd become so distant from himself that he wasn't even himself anymore. You couldn't even recognize he was ink. You're literally given another name, not yourself anymore. You're called ink.
And then there's that final fight scene where he has the choice to either give up his daughter and then like in reality commit suicide or like or not to give up his daughter. And when he decides not to give her up, he makes the conscious choice that like I'm not gonna let all these bad thoughts consume my life. I'll take action on this.
Mm-hmm.
And that turns his life around then.
I remember there was like when they were in a meeting one time too, like he was given an offer, and like the voice inside of him said the offer was nothing, but then like in reality they changed the offer of it, and then the voice inside of it had like they like said they worshipped him for it.
Yeah, and I think at one point they said, "Why do you even care about your daughter?" or stuff like that. So let's go into that whole idea of I believe the Walks wanted us to talk about not necessarily the incubus and the what are the other guys called? I keep forgetting. I know there's the Pathfinders, and then there's incubus, and then the
you could just say like nightmares versus dreams.
Right. Instead of talking about them as the actual people they were, is the whole idea is these are the thoughts, the voices in your head. And the incubus are really those dark thoughts, almost like depression-like thoughts that are talking to you. And then the other guys were like the good thoughts in your head, like the memories, the happiness, and how those are battling out in his head. And I think that really, the imagery, once you forget the whole idea that this is just a fight scene, is the idea that those moral agents are fighting in your head all the time. Which ones should I listen to? Should I listen to all these dark, depressing thoughts And I think when that whole idea leads you into making your choices, because you got good thoughts and you got bad thoughts. Now, which ones do you listen to? So I think that was a pretty cool idea that they put that in there, is the whole, because they were always trying to influence him in his head, you know what I mean? Because like the whole idea, like they touched his head and he thought things, or the imagery of the darkness consuming him. It's like, that's almost what you feel like, and that's like a lot of what people with depression will say, is like, I felt like darkness has consumed me, like it just comes over you.
Like some people say they feel like claustrophobic when they.
Yeah.
And that reminded me of like the shadow that would always creep over top of him when he would fall asleep.
Yeah, a lot of that too. Yeah.
Darkness of, yeah.
It is really interesting, yeah. And then the whole idea that they touched his head, and then thoughts went into his head, like good or bad, or the incubus got to him. The darkness went over him, and then bad thoughts went into him. So it's very unique imagery that I didn't really grasp until
the
the
and with the
end.
touching the head too, I think that like there's the scene when he's in the hospital and he sees his daughter and he touches her head.
Yeah.
That, like him transferring like all the good thoughts that he's had about her, like to her, and getting those good thoughts back from her. Because then, when he's Ink, she rubs his head too, like at the same time in the movie. So it's like, are they exchanging like the good thoughts that they've had about each other all their lives, and then.
Yeah, I think that was very, if not metaphoric, but symbolic of the whole idea that like the thoughts in your head you can think that about other people. The whole idea is like his love for his daughter, the good thoughts ultimately outweighed all of the bad thoughts, helping him make the decision, the conscious decision to listen to the good over the bad. And I think it took a lot out of the whole movie is just that fight, that constant struggle, and ultimately you have the choice of which one to listen to. It was really interesting, really good imagery with that. I also liked I don't know what that weird lady would have been. Like, I don't. Do you remember the weird lady they went and saw?
The one that cut off all her hair.
Yeah, the one that cut off all of her hair. I don't know if that would be just another one of those things in your mind that just like an imagery thing. Do you guys remember that?
I remember it, but
I don't think it.
I don't know if it meant too much, but it was just another interesting thing they kept putting him into, because when that happened, I think more or less they're trying to, Ink stopped it. He started making decisions that were different than before. Because if he had just continued to be the way he was at that point, he should have just let it happen, just let all the hair get cut off. But he actually consciously said, "Stop, that's enough."
Maybe it's like something that had something to involving his work. And Sadie was like his boss in a sense, and he had to like obey what she said. So that's why he was like bringing in more work to her.
That was interesting.
And then he like stopped it from happening.
That's an interesting like connection, because I think that's that may be what it is. Maybe it's not. Maybe we're making a stretch, but I like that, because I think it really is effective in the whole idea that you need to realize when to say no. It's like just like homework and finals and stuff, is you can study all night, but you need to realize there's a point where you need to tell yourself, I need to stop. I'm not going to get any more information in my head. I need to just stop myself. Or if you have a job, and you just work constant hours, and I think that's like you said, is he needed to learn to say no. That's enough. Because at that point, if he continued to it hurt something that mattered to him. And I think he kind of found the Pathfinder as somebody who mattered to him. Or not the Path, was she the Path? No, she was a storyteller. Storyteller, something that mattered to him. Which is interesting, because like, if he continued to just focus himself on work, it ultimately hurt his daughter, something that mattered to him. So that was just really good.
We've kind of gotten into the second part, which is like the questions of identity, of how do people change themselves. And that's like the main thing there, like to hit on, was like the character wanting to commit suicide, but like how he changed himself to.
I think, yeah, a lot of that was looking at those good and bad voices. In order to change yourself, you have to think,
what brings you happiness, like what makes you.
Yeah.
What is the truly, like, the ultimate.
What's worth living for?
Yeah.
Because he could continue to just be part of his work and just make a lot of money, but ultimately all those decisions lead him to this darkness. Yes, in the moment it's good, but I've hurt something I care about more, and it's just going to lead to more and more dark thoughts. So until you've changed yourself, until you've made the decision to start thinking differently, you'll just continue to think those things, you know what I mean?
Yeah, like, you're always going to have your negative thoughts, but it's trying to get, like, the positive to overpower.
Right.
Or in his sense is, like, trying to defeat what's defeating him.
Is me. I think it's so interesting because, like, I think when you look at, like, it's almost like a dream within the dream, because, like, those people were fighting in the dream world, but the whole ink thing was, like, way out there of, like, what would have happened to him. I think that's a very good parallel to the world, because, like, it shows that if he continues to make decisions like that, he hasn't made a conscious effort to make that change. And if he hasn't done that, he becomes so distant from himself. He doesn't even recognize himself. He doesn't even know who he is. He just called himself Ink. He completely forgot who he was. And I think that's what kind of some of the memories of his wife kind of did for him. Is like,
I don't know, like, talking about this now, like, things makes me think of, like, my parents. Of, like, when finals week, like, I don't talk to them, like, at all, because, like, it's all about studying, but in the end, it's like, what is the thing that actually matters?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. Yeah. Very good point. I don't ever, some of those things you stop thinking about. And I think a big one is, like, what caused him to change in the first place. I mean, obviously it was the death of his wife, but what made him want to just stop caring? It was the more he forgot who he was, maybe the less he had to grieve.
Or, like, the less he saw his daughter, the less he was reminded of his wife.
The less he was reminded of her parents that didn't like him at all.
Yeah.
So, like, his wife, who meant, like, absolutely everything to him, he can just, like, completely tune that out by not paying attention to anything that reminds him of his wife. And just going to work all the time and then drinking to forget all those things.
Right.
And I feel like the part where that one lady's cutting off that woman's hair, I felt like once he stopped her, I thought that woman, the storyteller, was, like, supposed to be his wife, like, related that how. Like, he stopped it because he saw resemblance to his wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe the same care he had for his wife.
Right. And you can sort of say that too when the storyteller dies in, like, that last scene, and then he looks at her and realizes, like, he can, like, save his daughter from dying too, and save himself from dying and be happy again. So he does that rather than just like, let them all die.
Because I think a lot of that is he came to the realization is that's what she would have wanted. And I think that's a lot of the good thoughts, trying to change your decision, your path in life. Because I think there's a little bit of the idea of fate in there, is like he was fated to kill himself. He was fated, but he made some conscious decisions to change that fate. He changed it to something else, because he was fated to become Ink, kind of in the story, and he was sitting there trying to think about all these things, thoughts are coming through his head, to ultimately make him diverge from that path into a different path of becoming somebody else, becoming who he used to be, maybe even.
The last section was, like, the general philosophy of it, and, like, how the writer's philosophy is different from.
Right. It's definitely pretty clearly existentialism, and the conscious making all decisions are becoming connected, and like I said, like we talked about with one of the biggest ones I always think of is, and I've mentioned this before in video, was Benjamin Button. There's a scene where a girl gets hit by a car, and they go through all of these things that happened beforehand, And if one person had made a different decision, that wouldn't have happened. The ultimate girl getting hit by the car wouldn't have happened. If, like, the guy had not forgotten his tie upstairs, if the girl's shoelace didn't break before she ran outside, if the one girl had not broken up with her boyfriend the night before, if the bakery guy wasn't running late due to something else, due to like working late hours at a different job, if one of those decisions had changed, just one, it changed the entire flow of events. So I think that a lot of that same idea is into the philosophy of the movie, and the whole idea that your conscious decisions can change your path, change your outcome. If you make one separate decision, it can change everything. And I think that big important one will either be the phone call that was made, or the playing with his daughter in the very beginning.
And like that's really relates to the Pathfinder too, because like I remember two things he said. Time doesn't work the same for me as it does for you, which makes sense because he was blind, so like he had to make his own way to like figure out how timing worked.
Right.
And then his next comment was like, God may have taken my sight, but I still have the beat. So like he still had like the time, like he knew the timing on how everything was gonna work out. And
right, and I think a lot of that, kind of comes out very clearly, is that you can change the bad thoughts, you can change all this by consciously making decisions that are different from that, that you've weighed in your head. Your morals are at battle in your head, and finally you make a decision, and it can change everything you do after that. I think it's pretty effective in the way it tells that story, and it's a pretty clear philosophy. And I mean, the Pathfinder very clearly kind of blatantly speaks it out. All the decisions are connected. The whole thing he talked about, for sure.
What about nihilism?
I don't know, wasn't Locke saying that it's not nihilism?
I don't
think he said something like that.
I don't know. I mean, maybe you could make the distinction that like it could have become nihilism, maybe, because it has such a the whole good message is like all the decisions you make can come up to a good outcome, and the whole idea of nihilism is there is no good outcome, so you might as well give up. So the whole idea is I won't be making any more decisions, because ultimately every decision will lead to this. So I think it's really tough to make that argument of nihilism, other than if you just continue to choose, if he had continued to choose not to listen to the bad thoughts, maybe he would just ultimately become nihilistic. I don't know. It's very hard to make the argument that it was very like.
I feel like if he didn't budge, like then the storyteller was basically just. Right. Yeah.
I think even his philosophy, even though he had some he started out kind of like you said, very nihilistic. Yeah. That wasn't his philosophy, I don't think, though, because he ultimately made some decisions that were good. And I mean, the whole idea of suicide, maybe, because like with the nihilism, is like the only thing you can choose. Then would be like when you die. That whole concept we talked about in the class was in philosophy classes. If you're really nihilistic, the one thing you can plan is the date of your death, and if nothing has meaning, why do anything else? I think it's definitely hard to argue that that's what the video was trying to come out with, because it came out with such a good message that you can make decisions to make a better life for yourself.
What about skepticism?
I think maybe a little bit of skepticism, because you're definitely going to be skeptical of a lot of those moral decisions, those moral voices in your head. And I think you can maybe make the argument that a lot of the times it's being skeptical of what you hear and what you understand and what you want to choose. I don't know, what do you think, Corey, with skepticism?
Yeah, basically just that too.
Because I think maybe it had a little bit of skepticism in it, I think, because.
Well, and the storyteller and Ink were interacting, he was kind of just like thrown off by her the whole time, a little confused by what
He didn't
she
really
was
trust what she
coming
was
off
saying.
of.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. Until she finally, in the end, was maybe, because in the end she was like, he's like, why are you here? Why are you here? And she goes, I'm here for you. And I think that's when he finally just accepted that that's what she was
Because like
there
even
for.
when they first met, he was like trying to fight her and like get rid of
He
her.
he wanted to get rid of her very much, but like there was something in his head that like wanted to keep her there. So I mean, he was like very skeptical about like keeping her
Right,
there.
because he had the choice to kill her or just,
And
he takes her as his prisoner or whatever it is.
At that one point he didn't want her to talk anymore, and then it was funny, he didn't want her to talk anymore, but then he continued to let her talk, and he continued to listen to her, and like
Kind of follow what she said.
mhm.
Fate.
Fate, yeah.
The one that like caught me with that is because the storyteller like said to the storyteller even said to Ink that like yours, hers, and my fate are like in your hands. It's like he was in control of everything that like whatever happened to the three of them together, and it wasn't just her, it wasn't just him, it was all of them together.
No, for sure. Because I think if not the idea that fate is set, but the idea that you can change your fate, I think was a big thing, since like all of our fates are in your hands, with that whole idea of the existentialism and the making conscious decisions, is you can change the fate, or if you don't make the conscious decision to make the other decision, you could, all of our lives become nothing as well. And that's when he decided to change the fate by making the decision to go see his daughter. I think, kind of like when we talked about the whole fate thing with the Matrix video, Corey's idea that there is and there isn't, kind of. It's like, yes, I believe there's fate, but it's not, you can change your fate. And once you're on a path, you can, that your fate's to be this, but you can change the fate to a different path or a different way. And I think a lot of that was with the Pathfinder. Like, I'm helping you find a path. Like, that very much, the whole idea of a path means fate. Like, and I think that's probably the biggest part of that's how fate is in there, is the whole idea of the Pathfinder. I'm gonna help you find a fate. But I think a lot of it is like you can make conscious decisions to change the road or change the path.
Another one I just thought of was empiricism, like your senses, how like that affected him too.
Yeah, he couldn't see, so a lot of his senses, he experienced the world differently. And it goes back to that whole phenomenology thing of being the way the people in the movie were experiencing things, and how a lot of the dad's ideas was he was experiencing work and not his daughter. Or I think the Pathfinder, he experienced things differently than everybody else because he didn't have that eyesight.
Or like the sense of touch when they were like touching each other's heads or whatever. Like I feel like that's another part of it too. I don't know, any other philosophies?
Other than, I think of one of the weird links that I made at the end, and I mentioned it before we started our video, was the how am I not myself, and how Ink wanted to be part of that group with the glass fronts on them, the incubuses. And it was very interesting that all of them wore that. They were all different people, but it was like they were wearing a mask, almost as to forget who they were. I'm going to wear a mask in front of me. And then at the end, they took the masks off.
That makes sense too, because when they were, like, when he had a flashback and he was getting food, they were using food stamps. And he was like so embarrassed that he was using food stamps, so he was like he was humiliated of like what his life was actually like.
Yeah, and he was
trying to hide himself.
Trying to wear a mask.
And then they drop him off at his house too after school, and it's like just this rundown like shack, and everybody's making fun of him for living there too.
I think that was a big thing with the whole how am I not myself, and he was trying not to be himself, I think, so much that he lost himself too much, I think. It's like, I understand you want to forget some things, but those people, those incubus, have worn those masks so long. That's what I thought was interesting at the end, that they took them off, because I think it got to the point for them that they no longer needed the mask. They just don't remember who they were. That's completely gone, and that once again, that might be a very far stretch, but that's what very much resonated in my mind. It was so significant they took those off because they wore them throughout the entire movie, and at the end it was like, I'm trying to get this goal, and the goal was to get him to just kill himself. That they were so focused on the goal that they just didn't need the masks anymore because it was like.
Or maybe they took them off because like they felt defeated, and so they were like trying to go back to their own.
Maybe that too is the whole I'm distancing myself so much.
Well, and for the entire movie, like Ink wears the hood, and then at the end he also takes his hood off too. It's sort of like how the incubuses take off their mask. That's the same thing too with him, is that he takes his hood off and like shows.
And now they're like with that, like in the middle of the movie, Storyteller, doesn't she take his hood off at one time too?
Yeah, and then he like puts it right
out.
back. Yeah.
He like freaks out, but like that's when she saw the scars on his head. It's like that's another thing, is like people actually saw who he actually was, and he was embarrassed by it.
Yeah.
And then
by the scars of his life. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a pretty big connection, but yeah, I think this has been a good discussion, and I think we ultimately got to a good end and understanding very much a pretty complicated movie. Even when I didn't understand it until right at the end, and I was like, oh, he's Ink, and then everything kind of turned on in my head. So, thank you, Alex, for watching, and that is all video.